It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millzy Brews, the show where I brew a deck for you on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. Millzy Brews is a show where I bring you my version 1.0 deck list for the commander in question. No testing. Just the best I can do on my first swing at it. This deck we're going to talk about today was supposed to come out last week. For anyone who hasn't been watching this channel for very long, the reason that the videos have been kind of sporadic as of the last week or so is because my wife and I had our first child, a beautiful baby girl, 3 weeks ago. And so my life has been a little bit hectic, but that's the fun, right? That's what we signed up for. I love it. I've been very much enjoying it, but last week, I did not do my job at preparing the content ahead of time, and so a lot of this past week, I was just kind of trying to get it done and up as best I could. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks, we'll get back on track because we have 2 weeks until we can start brewing our March of the Machines. I'm not going to start as soon as Spoiler Show. I'm going to wait for the whole set to come out, and then we're going to talk about all that March of Machines good stuff. I'm going to try to shoot a video this week with all of my responses to the reveal, which is going to happen the day that this video goes live, but of course you'll see that reveal later in the week. I want to do that mainly because I love the ideas that come with it and that kind of thing. Also, just want to give a quick announcement and then we'll get into the deck. There's a new podcast on Hometown Commander coming. I'm very excited about it. I brought 2 of my best friends in the world that play Magic in with me, and we're going to have a lot of fun. But anyway, let's get into today's episode. Today's episode, we have Millicent, Restless, Revenant. This was, like I said, the planned 4th episode from last week, Innistrad week. And I thought, what better way to end it than with Millicent? Now, this was a pre-con that I was pretty excited about, but to be honest, at the time, I didn't really see the appeal of it. You know, I liked the idea of spirits because I had been kind of tinkering with Kaikar at the time, but it hadn't really done what I wanted to do. So my hope was maybe I could come back and find a deck list I like. And I have to be honest, I really like this deck. So Millicent is a 5 white blue 4/4. Spell costs 1 less to cast for each spirit you control. It's going to come in a ton of handy because Millicent being 7 mana is very expensive. Once she goes back once or twice, she's going to be pretty hard to cast. Flying, whenever it or another non-token spirit you control dies or deals combat damage to a player, we get a 1/1 spirit creature with flying. And we're going to bank on that. We're going to bank on us getting that spirit token. There's a lot of different ways we could take this deck's. I mean, I think the most common is going to be flying, right? Because most of our spirits fly. And so we're going to kind of go wide like most blue-white creature decks do, and we're going to take over the game that way. The one thing that I realized, right, because we have a couple spirits that disturb into enchantments, was that we could play pretty hard into the enchantments. Here's my mana base for anyone that wants to see it. We're going to start in the enchantments, because we're going to try to play and try to revolve around Hallowed Haunting. This was an enchantment that came out in Crimson Vow, the same set where this pre-con came out. It says as long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance. Well, that would be great. Most of our creatures have flying anyway, but the vigilance isn't a bad thing. But it says whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you create a white cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness equal to the number of spirits you control. Well, newsflash, we're going to try out a ton of spirits on the battlefield. So I think Hallowed Haunting is almost always going to be good when we can see it. Now, we're going to play a couple cards in the deck that are going to help us find Hallowed Haunting. We're going to play some draw and things like that. But what I tried to do is shove this deck full of enchantments, especially enchantments that are going to buff our whole board or give us more value. We have the creatures that are going to be able to disturb into enchantments. And so we should end up with about 1/3 of our deck being enchantments. And that's going to really help us out in this idea that we have to try to get this Hallowed Haunting plan going. Of course, we want to try to get Hallowed Haunting down before everything else, but I think we do still need to play a lot of these enchantments because they really synergize with what we're trying to do. By that, I mean things like Favorable Winds, creatures you control flying, get +1/+1. Well, all of the spirits that we're playing, minus a couple, and all of these, and then as soon as we have enough enchantments, all of these spirits from Hallowed Haunting are going to have flying. So as soon as those tokens we're making with Hallowed Haunting get flying, or the rest of our creatures with flying are just going to get a flat +1/+1. Intangible Virtue, giving all of our creature tokens +1/+1 in vigilance. This is great because then we can attack for free with those spirits and still be able to block with them. Path of Bravery says as long as your life totals are greater or equal to than your starting life total, creatures you control get +1/+1. And your first question is going to be, but we're not playing a ton of life game. But the second ability is going to help us. It says whenever one or more creatures you control attack, you gain life equal to the number of attacking creatures. This is going to work out really well with Vigilance because we can just attack, gain all that life, keep ourselves up on life, and then use our spirits to block if need be. Radiant Destiny, a card I absolutely love for Mixalon, Rivals Ixalan. We get to play here because we get to take great advantage of it. As it comes in, pick a creature type. Of course, we're going to pick spirits. All of our creatures that type get +1/+1. And then as soon as we have the City's Blessing, they also have Vigilance. So tokens and regular spirits, all of them are going to get the buff. Rally the ranks, giving all of our creatures of a chosen type +1/+1. Obviously, we're going to pick spirits again. Reflections of Lit Draw, we're going to pick spirits. This is going to allow us to copy every spirit creature spell we cast. The good part here is that with Millicent out, if we cast a legendary spirit and then that spirit comes in because of her ability, that spirit dies, and we would get a 1/1 out of it, even though because if it's a legendary, we can't have two of them. Or Millicent would both see its self in, and that other Millicent die, and we would get more value out of that. Kindred Discovery, Calling Spirits, is going to let us draw a card every time a spirit comes in or it attacks. It's going to help refill our hands. Yes, some of these enchantments are a little expensive, but I think once we get there, we're going to be able to reap the benefits of them. We're playing the Restless today. We're playing the Mystic Remorpher Jar. We're playing the Tides to give us that extra mana. Then we're playing a couple of enchantments that just care about spirits in general. Spirit Bond says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay white. If we do, we make a spirit token. And that's pretty great because, again, we want the spirit tokens. We're playing Knowing Procession. We're playing Mondrak to help double up those tokens. And then for 1 and 08, we can sacrifice the spirit and target non-spirit creature gains indestructible until end of turn. Well, that's not as helpful because most of our creatures are spirits anyway. But Mondrak isn't, so we could protect it. There's a couple other creatures that we could potentially have access to that aren't spirits, but I think we really want this for the first ability. Same thing with something like Haunted Library. This came in the pre-con. Whenever a creature your opponent control dies, you can pay 1. If you do, you get a 1/1 spirit. So these are ways to get us these spirit tokens. My favorite enchantment that I honestly forgot about, that when I was putting this deck together, I'm like, man, this might actually do us a lot of good, is Starlight Spectacular. It says, Parade at the beginning of combat, choose each creature you control one at a time until every creature you control has been chosen. Each of those creatures get +1/+1 till end of turn for each creature chosen before it. So, of course, the first one gets nothing. Second one gets 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we pick them the right way, this is just going to buff up our entire board, make them even bigger. And if we already have some of these, flat boosts out, Starlight Spectacular is just going to make them even better. Field of the Souls, and our non-token creature you control is put in your graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 spirit creature token of flying into play. So again, we have a lot of these ways to kind of make these tokens. Like I said, we're playing the Anointed Procession, we're playing the Mondrak to double those up. We also want to play a little bit of Taxing because I feel like it's going to take a little bit of time for us to get our board going. So we got Authority of the Consuls, make all of our opponent's creatures come in tapped, getting us life. For each Ghostly Prison, going to hopefully try to help our opponents stop from attacking us before we can get 2/2 set up. And Prison in the Moon, Darksteel Mutation, both pieces of removal in their own right, but they're also both enchantments, so they really work out for our strategy. Come up into the artifacts, and we're basically just running, other than the reconnaissance mission there that helps us draw when creatures attack, we're also playing Biden of Thassa to do the same thing. But the rest of our artifacts really are here for mana. Arcane Signet, Azorius Signet, Midnight Clock, Strixhaven Stadium, and Talisman of Progress, and Soaring all tap for mana. Now, the cool part is that Strixhaven Stadium doubles as both something that taps for mana and an alternate win con. Depending on how many creatures wide we can go in the air, we can knock people out with Strixhaven's Stadium's last ability. Midnight Clock is in here for 2 reasons. 1, it's a mana rock, and 2, once we hit 12 counters out, we shuffle our entire graveyard back into our deck and in our hand and draw a fresh 7. What this can do is if we use a lot of our spells and we need to get them back, or we hit a dead hand but we have Midnight Clock going, we can kind of refresh our hand and draw up a new one. I had honestly considered playing more of the mana rocks. I thought we were going to have more of an issue, but to be honest, our curve is really at 2 or 3 mana for most of the spirits and most of these enchantments. So I don't think I'm as worried about it as I thought it was going to be when I originally started brewing the deck. Getting into the spells, and there's really not a ton of them because in all reality, we're playing into this enchantment theme as best we can. Sorceries, we're just playing 2, and we're just playing straight board wipes. Again, we have a lot of draw in Skull Clamp and these enchantments that do things when either our creatures come in or we attack. So I think we're going to have plenty of card draw. We don't need to play the Preordains or the Ponders of the world. We're just going to play Farewell and Supreme Verdict. Just just two board wipes that are going to hopefully hit our opponents hard when we need to hit them. And then for the instance, we are playing the Brainstorm. Psychonic Rift for Loaded Bounce, E2 to help us find Hallowed Haunting or whatever else we need. Flawless Maneuver and Clever Concealment are going to help us protect our spirits. Mystic Reflection has some interesting pieces in this deck because it says choose target non-legendary creature. The next time you'd make one or more creatures or planeswalkers. Next time one or more creatures or planeswalkers enters the battlefield under your control, they enter as a copy of that chosen creature. The interesting part there is if, let's say we're going to make 4 tokens, we could copy something like Patrician Geist and have them all come in as copies of Patrician Geist, and now we're buffing up our spirits even more. There's a couple of our spirits that just flat buff our whole team, and we could Mystic Reflection to make those tokens come in as copy of that spirit and basically just make our board even bigger. And then Swords and Reality Shift for some removal, as well as the Darksteel and Imprison the Moon we talked about. All right, getting up into the creatures. I mean, I think the problem, honestly, I had in this deck was there's too many, honestly, decent spirits. I actually kind of expected to have it be more of a bare bones thing where I was like really going to have to like stretch to get decent spirits. But I think the problem I ended up having is that I wanted to play more disturbed spirits than I did, but I just couldn't justify it over how many great spirits we have. Of course, we have Brago. I think Brago, to me, in this deck is a little bit of a mini commander. A lot of the things have effects when they come in or different things like that. So we probably don't mind bouncing some of those spirits. A couple of them make things when they come in or let us do certain things when they come in. So the great part about Brago is we can blink those and have them come back in. Like, let's say we attack with one of them, we can blink them and have them come back in as a blocker. I think Brago enables a lot of interesting strategies, but it's also a spirit. So that's very helpful. Brine Comer, one of the better disturbers in our deck. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it becomes the target of an aura spell. We make a 1/1, and then on the backside, it disturbs the same way. Whenever the backside enters the battlefield, or the enchanted creature becomes the target of an aura, make a 1/1 spirit. One of those things we can blink with Brago, but then on the backside just becomes another enchantment that can count for Hallowed Haunting. Cemetery Illuminator, whenever it enters battlefield or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. So this is another target for Brago. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and once per turn you may cast a spell from the top card of the library if it shares a card type with a card exiled with Cemetery Illuminator. So this is great because it extends our hand, gives us more of an option for things to cast. And just going to make it overall that little bit better. Dorothea, Vengeful Victim, 4/4 spirit for 2 on the front side, but as soon as it attacks or blocks, we sacrifice it. But when it comes back on the backside and we attach it to one of our creatures, that creature attacks, we get a 4/4 spirit token, and we sacrifice that token at the end of combat. That's great because with Mondrak and Annoying Procession, hopefully we're doubling that and getting more and more value. Drug Skull Champion, other spirits you control get +1/+1 and hexproof. Hopefully that helps protect all of our spirits as we kind of build this board that gets wider and wider. Drug Skull Reinforcements melee, so whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+1 for each opponent you attack this combat. Other spirits have melee, so now all of our spirits have melee. And then prevent all non-combat damage that we dealt to spirits control. This is going to help us to get around the red-based board wipes that deal with dealing damage to our creatures. Of course, still have to deal with the just destroy all ones, but hopefully this helps with some of those. Non-combat damage is a lot of things, but more often than not in Commander, it's the Blasphemous Acts of the world. It's the Planeswalkers that come down and deal damage to everything. So those are the things that we get to protect here. Drumbellower, one of the best spirits in the deck, just untapping all creatures we control during each other player's untap step. That's great because we can use a lot of different abilities, but the one card I really like with Drumbellower is Shackle Geist. Shackle Geist can only block creatures with flying, which kind of stinks, but the upside is we can tap 2 untapped spirits we control to tap target creature you don't control and tap it down. Well, if we have Drumbellower and Shackle Geist now, we can use all of our spirits to tap things down, and then they're just going to untap, and we can do it again. Empyrean Eagle is a bird and a spirit, and it gives other flying creatures we control +1/+1. Again, build that board up, build all of our creatures up to be bigger. Faithbound Judge, a very interesting spirit that came out in Crimson Vow. Beginning your upkeep, if it has 2 or fewer judgment counters on it, you put a judgment counter on it. And then as soon as it has 3 or more judgment counters on it, it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. But if we want to cast it out of the graveyard, it becomes a curse we can put on somebody, and then we put a judgment counter on it. And then if that has 3 or more counters on it, that enchanted player loses the game. So this is another way for us to kind of get an alternate win con, maybe pin somebody down if that's what we want to do. Karmic Guide can bring some things back from the graveyard to the battlefield. This is another great target for Brago to blink and put back in. get things back from the graveyard. Karmic Guide is, of course, used in a lot of blink strategies. Looks a little bit odd here when we're playing more of this mid-range, just go wide spirits deck. But if we already have Brago, why not use it? Catilda on the front side gets power and toughness equal to the number of spirits and enchantments you control, and on the back side it enchants a target creature for the same. This is great because we have a couple creatures that we can give lifelink or other things like that, and we're just going to hopefully gain a ton of life or do a bunch of damage. Catilda would be great on our commander, and we could potentially we could potentially threaten for commander damage if that's possible. I think more often than not, we're just going to play the Flyers game, outnumber our opponents in the air, and probably just win the game via that way. But it's great to have the ability to make one of our creatures pretty big and get in for some good damage. Kindly Ancestor, just a lifelink 2/3 on the front side, but on the back side it becomes an aura that gives a creature lifelink, and that's great. Maybe give that another backside of Catilda gives that creature lifelink, but we could give another one of our creatures lifelink. Plenty of things we can do with Kindly Ancestor, and again, the backside's an enchantment for this kind of enchantment, something we have going on. Kira, Great Glass Spinner, says creatures you control have when this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, counter that spell or ability. Kind of gives it a kind of a less good hexproof, but the nice part there is it's just going to stop some of those spells from hitting our creatures. Mausoleum Wanderer is going to do something very similar. Whenever another spirit enters the battlefield under control, we put a counter on it, and then we can sacrifice it to counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays X, where X is its power. This is great because we could potentially stop a combo depending on how long Mausoleum Wanderer sits out there. You ideally want to let it get to 5 or 6 or 7 and just pick somebody's big spell off by sacrificing it out of nowhere. Mirror Hall Mimic can come in as any copy of any creature on the battlefield except it's a spirit, so we could either take our opponent's nice creature and make it a spirit, or we can copy one of our own, and then on the backside we copy a creature and we get a copy of it on each of our upkeeps. So that's pretty cool because we can either pick our own creature and get copies of it, or we can pick an opponent's creature again and get more and more copies of it, except they're spirits as well. Mirror Hall Mimic is a really good card, and at the worst case scenario, our opponents have nothing. We have to choose something of ourselves, whether it's Patrician Geist or a Supreme Phantom, where it just buffs the spirits we have, or we pick one of our opponent's creatures and we just ride it out for value. Mondrak, doubling the amount of creatures we control, and we can sacrifice 2 of their creatures and make it indestructible. And that's pretty great. Again, we have so many of these cards that make these little tokens, so why not double them when we can? Patrician Geist, other spirits we control get +1/+1, and spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. This is going to help us with those disturb costs, but mainly it's just here to buff the rest of our team, and it has flying as well. Priest of the Blessed Graph, one of the only non-spirit creatures in our deck. Beginning of your upkeep, create X 1/1 spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of opponents that have more lands than you. It's probably going to be most of our opponents, especially if we're playing against green decks. So this is one of those cards that's going to help us because it's going to give us those creatures. And with a well-timed Mystic Reflection, this could give us a lot of really good value. Rattle Chains, when it enters the battlefield, target spirit gains hexproof until a turn. This could protect our commander. This could protect a lot of things. And we can cast spirit spells as they head flash. This is almost even better because we could, with Rattle Chains allowing us to cast our spirits at flash speed, we could kind of play like we have removal or things to respond to our opponents, and then at the end of those turns, flash those spirits out before our turn, and then being able to attack with them. Remorseful Cleric, just a 2/1 spirit for 2, but we can sacrifice to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Going to help us, hopefully, just a little bit shut down some graveyard decks if that's what we need to do. Selfless Spirit, one of the best spirits, can be sacrificed to give all of our creatures indestructible. Get around some of those big board wipes in Commander that tend to take the whole board out with it. The only bad part is this doesn't get us away from a Farewell, but it does get us away from most of the other pretty bad board wipes that we could deal with. Of course, Indestructible doesn't stop sacrificing board wipes, but a lot of people don't really play those sacrificing board wipes. A lot of people really play just those Wrath of God straight effects. So we have to be a little bit careful. That's why I love a card like Clever Concealment, because it can get us around those sacrifice board wipes by just phasing all of our creatures out and not having to do it. Shackle Geist we talked about on tapping creatures down. Soul Herder. This one's great. Whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 around Soul Holder. In the beginning of your end step, you can exile another creature, then return that creature to the battlefield under your control. This is another thing that can bounce that Karmic Guide to get things back from the battlefield. This can just bring things out and bring things back in. I like Soul Herder. It's kind of another of these Brago type cards where hopefully we can take a little more advantage. Now, I probably could have built a little bit more into this blink thing now that I'd thought about it, but I kind of wanted to go more classical with it, kind of more go wide with it, and see what we could do. And then maybe if this is a deck we test out, you get to kind of see, yeah, that enter the battlefield stuff makes a lot more sense, and you can kind of bring that stuff into the deck. I think they're just in here because they're great spirits in their own right, and why not blink something like Mirrorhall Mimic to come in and make a copy something different? You know, there's so many options there, and I think they're worth having. Spectral Adversary, flash flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we can pay 1 in a blue any number of times, and when it does, put that many counters on it, and then you get to phase out any number of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments, and that's really good because we could take out blockers, we could take out our own things in protection. I think Adversary has a lot of great versatility in that sense, and hopefully it comes out well for us. Supreme Phantom, just flat +1/+1 to all other spirits we control. Twin Blade Geist has double strike on the front side, and on the backside gives a creature double strike, and that's pretty great as well because that can make some of our attackers even better, especially when they have double strike and they're not getting blocked. And then Windborne Muse, creatures can attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. Now, these Windborne Muse and Ghostly Prison effects are great. You know, for most tables, they might potentially stop a couple players from attacking us. But at the end of the day, those effects only go as far as the decks you're playing, because certain decks can get around things like that, or they're just going to attack with creatures big enough that paying the 2 mana isn't going to matter. But I think you play these taxi type effects not to hope to stop every opponent, but to deter opponents while you kind of get your strategy going. So not too bad on the cost for this deck. I know a lot of the decks that I brew are fairly expensive because I'm using good cards, I'm using staple cards, but do I think this is the quintessential spirit deck? No, I think there's plenty of ways you can iterate on this deck. I mean, my considering board on this one is almost 40 cards. There's so many cards I'd consider for this deck. You can see the link down to the deck in the description, and you can go see for yourself what I considered. It was really hard to cut this deck down to 100 because I feel like I had a solid 120 of cards I really wanted to play. I just wasn't sure what to do. But tell me, what do you think of the deck list down in the comments? Let me know. If you like Millicent, you like this video, you like the content I'm making. Subscribe if you want to join me on my quest to outbrew your favorite Magic channel. And I will catch you next time.